Please, take a deep breath and close your eyes for a moment. Try to remember the very specific, sharp scent of heavy rolling tobacco mixing with the salty dampness of a Dutch autumn morning. Or perhaps bring to mind the distinct rattling sound of a two-stroke moped engine echoing down a narrow brick street as the sun goes down. Do these memories make your heart ache just a little bit? Today we are taking a journey back in time to the Netherlands of the 1960s, 70s, and especially the beloved 1980s. We are going to explore 20 completely normal, everyday habits and rituals that defined our youth. These were things we did without a second thought, things that brought us together and shaped our character. Yet, if you were to do any of these things today, you would be met with shock, heavy fines, or even a trip to the police station. The world has changed drastically, trading our wild freedoms for safety and regulation. But stick with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most dangerous, yet the most incredibly beautiful winter ritual we have lost forever. Let us unlock the door to the past. Before we dive into the specific details of these forgotten habits, we must understand the heartbeat of the Netherlands during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Time simply flowed differently back then. It was an era completely devoid of smartphones, instant messaging, and the constant, overwhelming flood of digital information. Life was lived in the physical world, moving at a much slower, more deliberate pace. Waiting was not a nuisance. It was an art form and a necessity. You waited for the bus in the rain, you waited for your favorite song to play on the radio, and you waited weeks for photographs to be developed at the local pharmacy. Modern society often tells us that without our incredible technological advancements, people in the past must have lived poorer, less connected lives. But the absolute opposite is true. Because we were not staring at screens, we were forced to look at each other. We engaged in deep, spontaneous conversations with our neighbors over the garden fence. Our emotional lives were remarkably rich, grounded in genuine human interaction and a profound sense of community. The lack of strict rules and the abundance of personal freedom meant that people relied on common sense and mutual trust. We were deeply connected to our environment and to one another, sharing a raw, unfiltered version of life that has slowly been sanitized away by the modern world. Now, let us travel back to the everyday commute. Do you remember stepping into a yellow Dutch train, the Intercity, and immediately being greeted by a thick cloud of blue smoke? In the 1980s, smoking was not just a habit, it was a deeply ingrained cultural ritual woven into the very fabric of daily life in the Netherlands. You would slide the heavy glass door of the train compartment open, finding a seat on those slightly scratchy, dark red or green plush cushions. Immediately, a fellow passenger would pull out a pouch of heavy shag tobacco, perhaps drum or fannel, and begin rolling a cigarette with practiced, rhythmic movements of their thumbs. The unmistakable, sweet and pungent aroma of burning tobacco would fill the small space. Ashtrays were built directly into the armrests of every single seat, overflowing with stubs. Nobody blinked an eye. Even in hospitals, waiting rooms, and post offices, the air was thick with it. Today, lighting up a cigarette in a train or a public building is completely illegal, heavily fined, and socially unacceptable. But back then, it was a moment of shared humanity. Strangers would offer each other a light, striking a match with a sharp hiss, starting conversations about the weather or politics, while the flat Dutch landscape rolled by outside the window. It was a time when the boundaries between personal and public spaces were blurred by that shared, smoky haze. Let us remember the sheer, unadulterated freedom of being young and motorized in the Dutch countryside. Picture the classic mopeds of the era, the beloved Puch or the Zundap, with their high handlebars and roaring two-stroke engines. In those days, wearing a helmet was not just optional, it was almost unheard of for the youth. You would kickstart the engine, the loud, rattling sound echoing off the brick walls of the terraced houses, and speed off down the narrow bicycle paths lining the canals. The wind would violently whip through your hair, carrying the scents of freshly cut grass, damp earth, and the faint, salty breeze from the North Sea. Young couples would ride together, the girl sitting sideways on the back, holding on tight to the driver, neither of them wearing any protective gear whatsoever. The feeling of the cool evening air on your face as you rode home from a barn party or a local brown cafe was exhilarating. Today, strict laws mandate approved helmets and cameras monitor every intersection. Riding a moped with the wind in your hair is completely illegal now, but in the 1970s and 80s, that lack of regulation felt like wings. It was a dangerous kind of liberty, perhaps, but it taught us a profound sense of personal responsibility and gave us memories of breathless summer nights that no safety regulation could ever replicate. And then, there were the legendary summer family vacations. Just imagine the scene. On a warm July morning, the family station wagon, perhaps an old Volvo or an Opel Record, was packed to the absolute brim. But the most coveted spot was not in the actual passenger seats. It was all the way in the back, in the trunk space. Parents would lay down some old blankets, a few flat pillows, and toss the children back there among the suitcases, the cool box filled with cheese sandwiches, and the camping gear. There were no seatbelts in the back, no child safety seats, and certainly no strict laws telling parents how to transport their offspring. We would spend hours tumbling around in the back of the car as it bumped along the endless highways toward the south of France or the beaches of Zeeland. We would press our noses against the rear window, making funny faces at the drivers behind us, or fall asleep curled up against a duffel bag, lulled by the hypnotic hum of the tires on the asphalt. Today, putting a child in the trunk of a car is a serious criminal offense, unimaginable to modern parents. The strict safety protocols of today have completely erased this chaotic, bruising, but incredibly cozy way of traveling. We survived the sharp turns and sudden stops, carrying those rough and tumble memories as badges of honor from a much simpler time. Now, think about the immense trust placed in children when it came to running errands. It was perfectly normal for a mother or father to hand a 10-year-old child a few silver guilder coins and send them down the street to the local cafeteria or the tobacco shop. Your mission was simple: buy a pack of cigarettes or a pouch of rolling tobacco for your parents. Sometimes, you would even get them directly from a vending machine mounted on the brick wall outside the shop. You would stand on your tiptoes, feed the heavy silver coins into the slot, hear the satisfying metallic clunk, and pull the heavy knob to retrieve the pack. The shopkeepers knew everyone in the neighborhood and never questioned a child buying heavy tobacco because they knew exactly whose child you were. There were no age verification checks, no warning labels covering the entire package, and certainly no laws threatening shopkeepers with massive fines. Today, selling tobacco to a minor is strictly illegal and heavily penalized. The idea of a child operating a cigarette vending machine on the street seems absolutely absurd. But back then, it was merely a chore, just like fetching a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. It gave us a quiet sense of pride and adult responsibility, a feeling of being a trusted part of the household machinery. Let us turn our memories to the crisp autumn evenings and the scent of burning wood that would drift through residential neighborhoods. In those decades, managing garden waste or getting rid of old, broken furniture was a community event. People would simply gather their dry branches, fallen leaves, and scrap wood and build a large fire right in their backyard or on an empty patch of dirt at the end of the street. These small bonfires were especially common around New Year's Eve or during the transition from autumn to winter. Neighbors would stand around the flickering flames, warming their hands, drinking a glass of Geneva or a warm cup of cocoa, while the children poked the embers with long sticks, mesmerized by the dancing orange sparks flying up into the dark night sky. The thick, white smoke would blanket the entire street, but nobody complained about air quality or particulate matter. Today, lighting an open fire in a residential area without a permit is strictly illegal, heavily fined by the municipality due to environmental and safety regulations. We have clean air now, but we have lost that primal, gathering warmth. Those casual neighborhood fires were not just about burning trash. They were an excuse to slow down, stand together in the cold, and share stories around the oldest focal point known to humanity. Do you recall standing on the shoulder of an on-ramp, armed with nothing but a piece of cardboard and a thick black marker? Hitchhiking was an entirely normal and highly popular mode of transportation for young people in the Netherlands. Teenagers and university students would write destinations like Amsterdam, Paris, or just the next provincial town on a torn piece of a cardboard box. You would stick out your thumb, trusting completely in the kindness of strangers. Drivers, from businessmen in sleek sedans to farmers in muddy trucks, would pull over and offer a ride. It was a fantastic way to travel without spending a single guilder, relying on the unwritten social contract of mutual trust. You shared the confined space of a car with someone you had never met, leading to deep, unexpected conversations about life, love, and the state of the world. Today, hitchhiking has almost entirely disappeared. While not technically a crime in every single spot, standing on highway ramps is illegal, and the overwhelming fear of strangers has made the practice virtually extinct. The modern world tells us it is too dangerous, too unpredictable. But in the 1970s and 80s, hitchhiking taught us how to talk to anyone, how to read people, and how to trust in the inherent goodness of our fellow citizens on the road. And speaking of the end of the year, let us revisit the chaotic, deafening weeks leading up to New Year's Eve. The sheer volume and power of the fireworks available to ordinary citizens, including young teenagers, was staggering. Children would walk the streets with their jacket pockets stuffed with incredibly loud firecrackers, known to all of us as strikers. These did not even need a lighter. You simply struck the red sulfur tip against a matchbox, like a giant match, and threw it. The explosions would echo through the quiet Dutch suburban streets, rattling the single-pane windows of the terraced houses. People sold fireworks from the trunks of their cars, bringing in heavy, unregulated explosives from neighboring countries without a second thought. The streets on the 31st of December resembled a joyful, smoke-filled battlefield. Today, the possession and use of these heavy, unregulated firecrackers are completely illegal. The government has banned almost all consumer fireworks, citing safety and noise pollution, with heavy fines for anyone caught holding them. While the safety arguments are undeniable, the modern, silent New Year's Eve lacks the raw, rebellious thrill of our youth. The smell of sulfur lingering in the freezing January air was the definitive scent of a new beginning, a loud, rebellious farewell to the old year. Now, let us think about the weekends spent doing household chores and building projects in the garden. Do you remember the corrugated grey roofing sheets that covered almost every shed, garage, and chicken coop in the Netherlands? Those were made of eternite, a material heavily laced with asbestos. It was incredibly cheap, waterproof, and indestructible. Fathers and grandfathers would spend their Saturday afternoons cutting these toxic sheets with standard hand saws or power tools. The cutting would produce a thick, white dust that coated their hands, their clothes, and the grass below. Nobody wore a mask. Nobody wore gloves. You simply brushed the dust off your jeans and went inside for a cup of black coffee and a slice of cake. Today, handling asbestos is strictly illegal for ordinary citizens. If you find it in your home now, you must hire specialized men in hazmat suits, turning your garden into a quarantine zone, costing thousands of euros. Back then, ignorance was our shield. While it is obviously a blessing that we now understand the severe health risks, looking back brings a strange mix of horror and nostalgia. It reminds us of a time when the physical world felt less threatening, when a man with a saw and a hammer believed he could build or fix anything with his own two bare hands. Let us walk back into the classrooms of our youth, the sounds of chalk scraping against the dark green blackboard, the rustling of paper, and something else that seems entirely surreal today, the distinct click of a lighter from the front of the room. It was remarkably common for school teachers in the 1970s and early 80s to smoke right at their desks while giving a lesson. Imagine a math or history teacher leaning back in their wooden chair, a cigarette dangling from their lips, casually explaining a complex formula or a historical battle. An overflowing glass ashtray sat right next to the stacks of our homework notebooks. The classroom air was a potent mixture of floor wax, chalk dust, and stale tobacco. For us students, it was just the way the world worked. Adults smoked, and they did it wherever they pleased. Today, bringing a lit cigarette anywhere near a school ground, let alone inside a classroom filled with children, is completely illegal and grounds for immediate termination. The modern school environment is sterile, heavily regulated, and completely smoke-free. Yet, when we remember those smoky classrooms, we do not think of the health hazards. We remember the larger-than-life personalities of those teachers, the relaxed authority they commanded, and an era where adulthood came with absolute, unquestioned privileges. Think back to the social gatherings, the birthdays, and the evenings at the local sports club. The relationship people had with alcohol and driving was vastly different. It was socially acceptable and entirely normal to consume several glasses of beer or small glasses of strong Dutch Geneva before getting behind the wheel to drive home. If someone stumbled slightly on their way to the car, friends might simply tell them to drive slowly and keep an eye out for the police. The strict blood alcohol limits and rigorous breathalyzer checkpoints we know today were either non-existent or rarely enforced in the same way. Driving along the dark, winding roads beside the canals after a night of heavy drinking was a risk many took without a second thought. Today, drunk driving is universally condemned, heavily policed, and highly illegal, carrying the risk of losing your license and your livelihood. And rightfully so, as the roads are much safer now. However, looking back at the 1980s, it highlights a broader attitude toward life, a profound, if sometimes foolish, reliance on personal judgment over state regulation. People trusted themselves to navigate the world, for better or worse, relying on their own internal compass rather than the rigid, flashing lights of modern law enforcement. Do you remember the spontaneous summer weekends when the sun finally decided to shine on the Dutch coast? Families or groups of teenagers would pack a canvas tent into the trunk or onto the back of their bicycles and head straight for the dunes. When you found a beautiful, secluded spot among the tall, swaying dune grass in Zeeland or on one of the Wadden Islands, you just pitched your tent. That was it. You built a small fire, listened to the crash of the North Sea waves, and slept under the stars. There were no reservations, no QR codes, no designated camping pitches, and no park rangers demanding to see a permit. You woke up with sand in your sleeping bag and the taste of salt on your lips. Today, wild camping in the Netherlands is strictly forbidden. The nature reserves are heavily protected, and pitching a tent outside an official, paid campground will result in immediate eviction and a hefty fine. The wild, untamed corners of the country have been fenced off and organized. We have preserved the nature, but we have lost the spontaneous joy of waking up in a place that belonged to no one and everyone. That raw connection to the earth, the freedom to just stop and sleep wherever the landscape invited you, is a beautiful memory of a wilder time. Let us journey to the rural edges of our towns. Before the massive supermarkets took over every aspect of our diet, getting milk was a local, deeply personal ritual. You would grab a heavy aluminum milk can by its metal handle, mount your bicycle, and ride out to the nearest dairy farm. The farmer would take your can and fill it straight from the bulk tank with raw, warm, unpasteurized milk. It had a thick layer of yellow cream floating on the top, and it tasted richer, sweeter, and more alive than anything you can buy today. You paid with a few coins handed directly to the farmer's wife. There were no barcodes, no expiration dates printed on plastic bottles, and no government health inspectors testing every batch. Today, selling raw, unpasteurized milk directly to consumers without strict, overwhelming regulatory oversight is essentially illegal, or so heavily restricted that few farmers bother. The authorities deem it a severe health hazard, but for us, that warm milk was a staple of childhood. It tied us directly to the seasons, to the land, and to the people who worked it. The tactile memory of the cold metal can swinging from the handlebars as you pedaled home is a testament to a time when our food was local, unprocessed, and fundamentally real. Now, think of a typical Sunday morning in a suburban Dutch driveway. It was the designated time for men to tinker with their cars. The hood would be propped up, the radio would be playing a crackling broadcast of the latest football match, and hands would be covered in thick, black grease. When it was time to change the oil, there was no environmentally friendly disposal system. The heavy, used motor oil was simply drained into a bucket and then, quite often, poured directly down the street drain, or even dumped into a hole dug in the sandy corner of the garden. Furthermore, the cars ran on leaded gasoline, the sweet, toxic smell of which filled the air at every petrol station. Today, dumping chemicals or motor oil into the soil or the sewage system is a serious environmental crime, punishable by massive fines. We are now acutely aware of groundwater contamination and ecological damage. Yet, that era of innocent ignorance holds a strange charm. It was a time of ultimate self-reliance, where maintaining your own vehicle was a point of immense pride. The smell of oil, metal, and leaded fuel is forever etched in our minds as the scent of a Sunday morning, a scent of mechanical independence that modern, silent electric cars will never replicate. Let us picture the chaotic, acrobatic ballet of the Dutch bicycle commute. Bicycles were not just for solitary riding, they were the ultimate family vehicle. It was entirely normal to see a mother pedaling fiercely on a heavy steel bicycle, with one child sitting in a small wooden seat mounted on the handlebars, another child perched sideways on the luggage carrier in the back, and perhaps a bag of groceries dangling perilously from the side. On dark winter evenings, teenagers would cycle home from sports practice with 3 people on a single bike, laughing loudly in the freezing rain, entirely without working lights or reflective gear. The small dynamo on the front wheel was usually broken or slipping on the wet tire. Today, while perhaps not the crime of the century, carrying multiple passengers in an unsafe manner without approved child seats or riding without working lights will immediately attract the flashing blue lights of the police and a very expensive fine. The modern emphasis on absolute safety has outlawed this precarious balancing act, but those crowded, wobbly bicycle rides were filled with warmth and physical closeness. Clinging to the back of your friend's coat in the pitch black, trusting them to navigate the unseen puddles, forged bonds of friendship that lasted a lifetime. Do you remember how our streets belonged to the animals just as much as they belonged to us? In the 1970s and 80s, neighborhood dogs were practically free citizens. They roamed the sidewalks without leashes, trotting along to the bakery or the butcher shop, waiting patiently outside. Everyone knew whose dog was whose, and with this freedom came an inevitable consequence: dog waste on the pavement. We called it the infamous surprise on the sidewalk. There was no culture of carrying little plastic bags, and no one would ever dream of bending down to scoop up their dog's mess. You simply learned to walk with your eyes glued to the ground, developing a unique skipping walk to avoid ruining your shoes. Today, letting a dog roam unleashed in residential areas, and especially failing to clean up after them, is strictly illegal and enforced by local municipal wardens with zero tolerance. Our streets are undoubtedly much cleaner and safer now, but the disappearance of the freely wandering neighborhood dog has removed a layer of communal charm. Those dogs were common friends, shared pets that connected neighbors. We traded a bit of messiness for order, but in doing so, we lost the casual, untamed rhythm of those lazy suburban afternoons. Let us dive into the adventurous, sometimes reckless play of our childhood. For those who lived near the coast, the ultimate playground was not a manicured park with rubber mats, but the colossal concrete remnants of the Second World War. The dunes were dotted with abandoned bunkers, their heavy iron doors rusted half open or missing entirely. As children, we would bring flashlights with dying batteries and explore these dark, damp, echoing chambers. There were exposed rusty rebar, deep, unlit shafts, and broken glass everywhere. Parents had no idea where we were, completely unaware that we were climbing on the roofs of military ruins. Today, accessing these historical structures is heavily restricted or entirely illegal due to safety concerns and ecological preservation. The entrances are sealed with heavy brickwork, and large warning signs threaten prosecution for trespassing. We are no longer allowed to risk our necks on crumbling concrete. Yet, those bunkers were the castles of our youth. They provided a canvas for our imaginations, a place where we played out grand adventures away from the watchful eyes of adults. Surviving the scrapes, the darkness, and the fear gave us a profound sense of bravery that no structured playground could ever provide. Think back to the simple joy of bringing a piece of the wild world into your living room. When families went for a Sunday stroll through the woods or the heathlands, it was common practice to collect treasures from nature. If you saw a beautiful, rare, wild orchid growing by the path, you might dig it up and take it home to plant in your own garden. Children would wander into the shallow ditches with a glass jar, catching tadpoles, frogs, or even rare salamanders, bringing them home to keep on the kitchen counter until they miraculously transformed. Today, the Dutch Flora and Fauna Act makes it completely illegal to uproot wild plants, pick protected flowers, or capture native amphibians. The fines for removing anything from a nature reserve are severe, aimed at protecting our fragile, shrinking biodiversity. While this legislation is absolutely vital for the survival of these species, it marks a stark shift in how we interact with the natural world. Back then, nature was not a museum to be observed from behind a rope. It was a tactile, interactive playground. Holding a slippery frog in your bare hands or smelling a wild flower on your windowsill fostered a deep personal love for nature that modern rules, unfortunately, keep at arm's length. Let us celebrate the ultimate expression of Dutch commercial freedom, the traditional Queen's Day free markets. Before the day was heavily managed and branded, the 30th of April was a day of glorious, unregulated chaos. Anyone, young or old, could lay down a blanket on the pavement anywhere in the city centre and sell whatever they wanted. People sold homemade cakes baked in their own kitchens, poured glasses of warm lemonade, and even cooked meat on rusty barbecues right on the street. There were no permits, no health and safety inspectors checking the temperature of the food, and no restrictions on where you could sit. It was a chaotic bazaar of second-hand junk, loud music, and pure joy. Today, while the tradition survives as King's Day, it is heavily regulated. You cannot simply sell home-cooked perishable food without strict hygiene certificates, and the prime selling spots are often tightly controlled or cordoned off for safety reasons. Selling a questionable meat skewer to a stranger without a permit is now illegal. The modern rules protect our stomachs, but they have diluted the wild bohemian spirit of the original markets. The magic of those old celebrations lay in the absolute unquestioned freedom to share, sell, and celebrate together on the streets without a single rule holding us back. Now, let us recall a habit that we might not be proud of today, but one that was entirely common during long drives. Imagine cruising down the highway, the windows rolled down to let in the breeze. When you finished eating an apple, a candy bar, or smoking a cigarette, you simply tossed the core, the wrapper, or the glowing stub right out the open window. It would fly into the wind, bouncing along the asphalt, or disappearing into the green verge alongside the road. There was little thought given to the accumulation of litter. The roadside was seen as an endless, invisible bin. Today, throwing anything out of a moving vehicle is a significant offence, highly illegal, and widely condemned by society. We have anti-littering campaigns, massive fines, and a deep, collective guilt about polluting our environment. Looking back at how casually we treated the landscape is a striking reminder of how much our collective consciousness has evolved. But that memory, the feeling of the wind snatching a paper wrapper from your fingers as the car sped toward the horizon, remains a vivid snapshot of an era defined by a carefree, almost naive disregard for the consequences of our everyday actions. Finally, let us remember the ultimate winter thrill that would send shivers down the spine of any modern safety inspector. When the legendary freezing Dutch winters arrived and the village streets were covered in thick, packed snow and ice, a very special kind of magic happened. A father or an older brother would take a thick rope and tie a wooden sled directly to the rear bumper of the family car. Children would pile onto the sled, wrapping their scarves tightly around their faces. The car would then slowly drive through the snowy, deserted residential streets, pulling the sled behind it. You would slide and drift over the icy roads, screaming with laughter as the exhaust fumes mingled with the freezing winter air. Today, attaching a sled to a motor vehicle and towing people on a public road is wildly illegal, considered incredibly dangerous, and will result in immediate arrest. The modern world sees only the terrible risks of slipping under the wheels or crashing into a parked car. But in those deep winters of the 1970s and 80s, it was the pinnacle of childhood joy. It was a beautiful, dangerous trust exercise between the driver and the children, a frozen memory of raw happiness that warms our hearts even decades later. As we look back at these 20 faded memories, a profound realization washes over us. We are not merely grieving the loss of old objects, the dangerous games, or the lack of safety rules. What we truly miss is the way time felt in our hands. We yearn for the youth that allowed us to be wonderfully foolish and for the deep, unspoken trust we had in our neighbors and in society as a whole. The modern world is undoubtedly cleaner, safer, and heavily organized, but it often lacks the warmth and the chaotic charm of the days when we relied on our own common sense. We miss the physical closeness, the freedom to make our own mistakes, and the sincere, unplugged connection with the people around us. If this journey through time brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I turn to you, my old friends. Which of these lost habits do you miss the most? Or what is a wild thing you did in your youth that would be completely illegal today? Please share your personal stories in the comments below. Let us build a warm, nostalgic community together, and I will read every single one of your memories. Thank you for walking down memory lane with me.